Hi, this is Pete Lyons with Let's Play Salesforce, and in our first ever properly branded Tableau CRM video, I've got a guest with us. Paul is going to show us some really cool stuff that we can do to actually take characteristics of our data set and write them back to Salesforce records. Like, how cool is that? But enough of me talking. Paul, this is your show. Take it away.
So Peter, today I'm going to demonstrate a research I did, just like what you said. It's about writing the dataset data back into Salesforce object. So let me just start with showing you a lens in EA, and this is the lens. Basically, what this lens shows us is the rollout summary coming from the product line item and ARR, and it gets aggregated to the opportunity level. So in this case, I have already got the product line and ARR aggregated to the opportunity, and this is the product total ARR. And let's say if I have two opportunity, right, under the same account, then I will, aggregate the total of the opportunity ARR up to the account. So in this case, for opportunity A1 and A2, you will see that the total ARR gets aggregated and saved into the account record. And similarly, if you want to roll up the account level ARR to the parent account, in this case, we have 3 child accounts. Account A, account B, and account C. And when it gets aggregated, the total amount will end up sitting in the parent account. And this is the end result. All right. And behind the scene, obviously, everybody knows there's a SAQL. This is what the SAQL looks like. One thing I want to point out is that, in order to write the data back, first thing you must have is a record ID. In this case, I have got the opportunity record ID showed up in the lens, and also have a decimal value sitting over here, right? So if we switch the screen and get into the Salesforce, this is a Salesforce report. And what you're seeing right now, there's no value coming back from the EA, and the field, the placeholder, is blank. So the idea is, how can we write the data from the data set through this lens and write it into the Salesforce record and place a value in the opportunity, in the child account, and also in the parent account. All right. Actually, the process is very straightforward. All right. The first thing we will need to do is, of course, create a placeholder, the custom field in each object. In this case, I've created opportunity product total ARR Einstein field at the opportunity level, and also have created opportunity total ARR at the child account level, and same thing, a child account total ARR at the parent account level. So basically, we have two object account and opportunity, and they have additional custom field as a placeholder for storing the value coming back from Einstein. And now we have the data model defined. And the next thing, of course, is we need to write some code, right? And before we get into the code, I want to show you something for configuration purpose, and that is the custom metadata type I created. The reason why we have a custom metadata type is mainly for us to make the code scalable and reusable. Oh, in this case, since I'm writing the opportunity total AR back into opportunity record, the first thing I wanted to do is obviously identify an object for the data, right? Secondly, I wanted to identify the custom field I created, and also a data type for that field. All right. And the third thing is actually the query itself. In this case, I'm showing a query that is different from what you're seeing in the Einstein lens. In this case, what you're seeing here is a much more complicated, SAQL, and reason behind it is that you want to show both the parent and child and opportunity record and its corresponding value, right? But when we write data back into Salesforce, we're going to just do one object, one record at one time. So in this case, I simplified the query. I basically just said, I'm going to pick up the opportunity ID and also the value for the opportunity product total ARR. And this is one I'm pulling out of the Einstein analytics. All right. So the query gets simplified, but the key value that we need for writing the data back is here, right? We have the ID. We also have the value that we want to pull from Einstein. Okay. And to set it up, to make it, like I said, to make the code scalable, there are a few more things we wanted to do. One thing we will need to do is, in order to use the analytic REST API, we will have to have a remote site created. So in this case, I have a EA REST API remote site created in my test auth, right? And with this remote site created, then I can set up an endpoint, and this is the endpoint for the API REST API call. Now, let's just switch into the code itself. In the code, this is what the code looks like, right? Starting from reading out the metadata type from the record that was created and saved in the metadata records. We wanted to pull the endpoint. We want to pull the payload, which is the SAQL. We want to identify the object for data, and also want to identify the field and the data type. It's very straightforward, right? Then after we pull the metadata from Salesforce metadata type, we wanted to make a HTTP REST request call, and this basically will get the data out of the Einstein analytics, and we will be able to pull the data back into our Apex and save it within the string variable. Okay, and after we have the response data back and save it in the string variable, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to use the JSON parser to parse the data. And remember, when we define the query, there are two main variable that will be used. One is the record ID. In this case, that is our opportunity ID for the previous query. The second value is actually the data value, and for the JSON parser, we want to make sure we use the right method to parse the data, which is why we want to be able to define the field data type, so we can parse the right value and save it in the right variable in our Apex code. All right. And finally, since we do two while loop, the first while loop is basically identify the existing record based on the record ID. All right. The second while loop is to pull the data and write the data into the map records. So what we're doing here is we get the record ID, we have the field API name. Now we just populate the value and put it into the map. Then we're done. The last thing for us to do is to simply do an update, and this actually will update the record. Now I'm going to schedule the Apex call. Right now, my time is 3:34 p.m. I'm going to change the scheduled time to 3:36. And the reason why we're seeing 3 different Apex classes scheduled is because the first one is we are aggregating the opportunity product total ARR, and we will be saving it at the opportunity level. And the second one is the opportunity total ARR, and that will be saved at the child account level. The third one is the child account total ARR, and it will be saved at the parent account level. So now I'm going to go ahead and execute the scheduling. So behind the scene, 3 Apex classes have been scheduled. Now, if we switch the view and go back to Salesforce, and let's refresh it. Now you can see there are 3 jobs that have been scheduled, and the runtime is at 3:36 p.m. my time. And if I go to the Apex job queue, notice that now we have the job submitted, and these 3 jobs has been queued up. One is for, like I said, for opportunity product aggregation. The other one's opportunity aggregation. The third one is a child account aggregation. And let's refresh the screen.
It wouldn't be a video about analytics if we weren't spamming the refresh button.
Yes. Okay, now, as you can see, the 3 scheduled jobs have been executed and completed, right? Remember earlier, I was showing you in this report, there's no value sitting in the placeholder. Let's refresh the report now and see what happens. Voila. Now the value has been populated from Einstein Analytics into Salesforce. And through this report, we can identify the value is sitting at each level correctly, and the aggregation adds up, and the hierarchy now have the right value sitting in the right place.
So first thing, that's awesome. And for me, it literally came up that I was having a conversation about how, I had taken a data set as far as I thought it could go. We were creating a bunch of janky multi-value fields, and then we couldn't get them combined because once you create a multi-value field in the data flow, you can't touch it. And I was like, but what if we could write the values back to a Salesforce record, redigest them, kind of like how cows eat grass, and let it go through multiple iterations? Well, then I bet we could do it. And, Sayantani actually said, well, that already exists. And she pointed me to your blog post, and it's like, well, I've been, I see you post, but like, how did that one like slip past me? This is the coolest thing I've seen in a long time to come out of the community. Not a knock on what anybody else builds. There's definitely a lot of cool stuff, but like, I wouldn't have thought to actually do it. I would have thought to like put an idea on the exchange and see if I could get somebody else to do it for me. But I do have some questions. So do you see use cases along the lines of, let's say that we are integrating external data into analytics. It's high volume data, so we don't want to integrate it directly to core. Maybe big objects is the wrong use case, but we're blending it with Salesforce data to get these calculated derived values, and being able to write those back to the records in Salesforce. Does it seem like one of the main angles? And what other killer use cases do you think there are for this?
I think you brought out very useful use cases, and I certainly agree with you. There are a lot of data that's sitting outside of Salesforce, and now Salesforce has so many connectors. We can bring in the data right from the external data source into Einstein Analytics, and then we can do our magic, aggregate them. I think the key thing is presenting those external data that says within a account record or opportunity record, and that will actually become a data enrichment process. So seeing those data associating to a account, the data could come from your data center, right? Maybe you are running a SaaS model a solution, but you really want to provide the type of usage data and bring it into the account, so your sales rep, your customer success manager can actually see what's going on at our data center, and how our customer has been using our product in what way. So the potential is huge, right? And we need to feed the right kind of information to our business stakeholder, and populating data like usage data from the data center, and bring it into your account record, and sharing with your sales rep and CSM will be an excellent use case.
All right. So next, more of a comment. I was not sure what to expect. I actually, as soon as I saw the link, I was immediately like, I'm gonna go like just chew this blog apart and get every piece of information about it. But when I reached out to you and you said we would do a video, I said, okay, I'm not allowed to look at the blog post then, because I wanted to save it. I wanted to be surprised. And what one of the first surprises for me was that we're just working off a standalone lens initially, but really just using that to get the query parameters that we're going to need. And it makes sense that the whole thing's headless. But initially what I was thinking was like, I was imagining that it would be calling a dashboard or calling, but that's much more of an as needed. Like you've got action framework, you've got bulk actions. So really this is a headless operation that happens behind the scenes, which makes sense because it is automatic and it's not, it doesn't need to be end user facing. But one thing I observed is that you're using the SACL expression because we're going through the APIs. It uses kind of that legacy pigquill reference when it's calling out the data set. So for example, when you were showing the standalone lens, the ID in the URL was 0FK, which is the ID for a lens. But the SACL for that calls the data set by name. Now on the dashboard, if you control E from that lens, at the bottom, it'll say the data set name, but it'll show the 0FB prefix, which is the object name is EdgeMart, and that's your actual data set ID. But I noticed that you have that old standard that I haven't seen since like 2016. And again, I'm assuming it's because this is how the API expects it. You have the second ID in there that starts with 0FC, which is the EdgeMart data object. How do you retrieve that ID?
Great question. So the way to retrieve the ID is very straightforward. For those of you who are familiar with a Salesforce Workbench, and if you log into Salesforce Workbench, the first thing you will want to do in order to retrieve the ID is by going over to Utility and select REST Explorer. And once you open it up, right, there is a get method allowing you to identify what kind of information you want to retrieve from. And in my case, I basically just do a wait and slash data set. And this actually will provide me the list of the data set that is sitting in my Einstein Analytic instance. So once I get there, there are mainly two ID that we would need to retrieve. The first one is actually the folder ID. The second one is the current version ID. So in my query, I basically replace the name with the ID, and that's how I am able to retrieve data out of this particular data set, right? So just think of things in this way. The lens I demonstrated is basically just an idea. You can leverage the query that's sitting in the lens, but if you are familiar with the query syntax very well, you don't have to count on a lens query. You can create your own query, and which is why I basically combine everything and put it into the payload field in my metadata custom data type. And so you can be creative in a way that as long as I know the data set, I can do any type of query I want, and there's no limitation or restriction. As long as you identify the right field and you have the right field mapped to your destination field in Salesforce, then you're good to go.
So another angle that we could take with this would be to do a compare table of all of your partner accounts, do a rank within group windowing function, extract the SACL you need from that, and then populate that ranking to have like an account rating system of, what are the best performing accounts year to date. So yeah, a lot of, and they're, now I'm thinking about all the new math functions that were added with like sine, cosine, and tangent. I'm going to do the distance between points on a map. How far is the child account's location from my desk? So next, this is more just an assumption. I'm assuming that we're going to put a link in the description to your blog, which is going to have all the code and everything that everybody's going to need to try this out on their own.
Yep.
And that includes me. I'm totally going to try this out. And then the last, and in fact, I'm already thinking about 3 different clients that I have really killer use cases that this is going to help on. So the last question that I have, from a scalability perspective, what are your recommendations about, how much data can it process? How frequently can we schedule it? Like, where do you push the limits, and where would you start to say that might be a little too much? Maybe you either need to break it up or scale your expectations down.
Yeah, that's a great question, Peter. So my view in terms of the scalability is basically, really looking into your use case. With the metadata, custom data type, right? You are allowed to bring in as many fields as you like. So in my example, I'm only bringing one decimal field and retrieve that field, and that's it. But is that a limit? Of course not. You can bring in a multiple column for the same record, right? And on top of that, the value could be in any data type, right? So I will probably put it this way. It really depends on the use case, but the scalability, the reusability. When I first get into design, I struggled a little bit because my first iteration was just purely doing a proof of concept. So I hard code everything. And then when I get into my second iteration, I realized that we need to separate out all these hard-coded value, and what would be the best placeholder to keep the value, like the endpoint, like the object, like the field. Custom metadata will be the best place to do it, and we can configure multiple, records. In the example I just gave it to you, I did one for the opportunity, and the second one for the child account, the third one for parent account. So the use case is really limited by your own imagination, and in terms of the scheduling, right? I think one of the key things we wanted to address through this exercise is about how can we schedule our extraction, maybe immediately after a data connection, maybe after execution of a data set, right? And through this as Apex scheduler, you are allowed to do it by setting the right time in your scheduler, and you're good to go. So overall, I would say it's really up to your use case. But I think there's a great potential to utilize what I've demonstrated. And ever since I posted my blog, and everybody, I've seen a lot of people jump on the solution, and they must have created a lot of use cases. I think Peter, in your case, you're welcome to share your use case once you start working on your solution. I'll be looking forward to hearing your use case too.
Yeah, and it's still just churning away. I'm thinking, even if you've got something as simple as sales analytics, you could take valuable insights like is pushed and is pulled and write them back. And there's App Exchange offerings that do that sort of thing, but I found a lot of clients have said that it doesn't really boil it up the way that they're expecting to see it, and certain things do or don't count. Or when we do all of these, I've got use cases in the healthcare space, in the payer space, where we need to answer a simple question like, is this member, has this member renewed or not? And we do all this complicated date logic to find a sibling record. And then, we could use that to populate a lookup. I mean, first we populate a text field with an ID and then have some other piece of automation populate that lookup. But I'm just sitting here brainstorming like a kid in a candy brainstorming store. There's so many applications that this could have. And I think it really helps to close that loop where traditionally analytics only writes back when a user takes a deliberate action framework, bulk action. This is a way to take these rich data sets that we have and actually incorporate that for core users to leverage. I think this is awesome. So Paul, I want to thank you for coming on the channel tonight. And for the folks at home, if you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, tell a friend. And as always, thanks for watching.
Thank you, Peter.